You just heard the Zoom lady tell you what's going on. So I'm going to count it down and then do the introduction. Just let me get my phone here. Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the King's Report. I'm sure a lot of you guys out there and ladies have heard about the Convention of States. So today we have two guests that are going to enlighten us on what it is, how it's done, and what, in the end, they think should happen. Because we know during these times of chaos and tumult, the United States could be on a better trajectory. So I'd like to welcome Matthew Zale, who is our Pennsylvania State Director for Convention of States, and James Oconnor, who's also with the Convention of States. So, gentlemen, tell us a quick about yourselves and what the Convention of States is for our guys, and then we'll jump into an in-depth view towards the end. But give us a general of what the Convention of States is now.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give as much time as possible to our state communications coordinator, who communicates much better. James Oconnor is very experienced, not only in Convention of States. Even though I've been a volunteer for 9 years, we are the largest grassroots organization in Pennsylvania and in the country. Jim Oconnor, I think, can give you a much better explanation of our nonprofit constitutional movement. James Oconnor, please.
Thank you, Mr. State Director. I'm Jim Oconnor. I'm a retired professional land surveyor. I've dealt with the law, the boundary law, for better than 35 years. I would like to preface this that Article 5 is the law. And you have to do an in-depth study to truly understand what is going on. Simply put, Article 5 in the Constitution allows two ways to amend the Constitution. The first, if 2/3 of Congress agrees, they can propose wording and send it out to the states for ratification. The framers, when in 1787 in Philadelphia, when they wrote the Constitution, realized that there had to be another way, because they feared and they knew human nature, that if the federal government ever usurped power not enumerated to it, it would never voluntarily relinquish that power.
True.
So George Mason made that comment, and everybody in the room had a head slap moment. It was self-evident to them. So they came up with the second mode, which is to allow the state legislatures to apply to call a convention of states. The Convention of States is basically a meeting between states. That's all it is.
So, Jim, let me jump in here. So, Constitution ratified 1776. 11 years later, 1786, they say, whoa, wait a minute. Things can spin out of control here in this newly formed United States of America, which were 13 colonies that had just joined. So, right, 11 years later, they say, how do we prevent this usurpation? Because, a 10th Amendment power is not given to the federal government, which, to make it simply explained, it's Obamacare. We never voted for universal health care at the state level, so how could Obamacare be in existence? So I think that's a great point.
Well, and again, it's been done because the federal government has become a monolithic entity.
Yes.
They no longer recognize the separation of powers. They no longer practice the original intent of the Constitution. What people don't realize is in this country right now, there are two constitutions. When people say the Constitution, they think of the average pocket Constitution.
Yep.
That's a tiny little pamphlet. It's got 3,000 words, if you include all 27 amendments. Unfortunately, that's not what the U.S. government uses. The U.S. government has a constitution called the Annotated Constitution. And that's a 3,000 page, 20-pound behemoth.
Well,
And
you
the
know what,
difference
Jim?
is,
Restate that. Okay, so right, we're walking around with the pocket constitution. What does the government of these United States go by? A 3,000 page constitution?
yes, and it
Wow.
includes all of the case law that has been decided,
Case law. Uh,
and that's the difference.
and that's
And
the
we have judicial, and judicial fiat is one of the main ways the federal government has usurped all of this extra power.
never knew that.
Yep. And I mean, you know, if you do the history, okay, you can look at the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause was written at the end of the Civil War, and it was to, at the time, commerce meant interstate shipping. Well, in the early 20s, there was a case, and the Supreme Court defined commerce as manufacturing. And that was one of the biggest power grabs that ever happened. That's what brought on the EPA, OSHA, and a litany of other of those alphabet agencies that now run roughshod with regulation.
Exactly.
Again, the Constitution says, Article 1, Section 8, the federal government can do 18 things. That's it. And the right to write laws was invested in Congress. So truly, all of the regulation that has not gone back through Congress and been approved is unconstitutional. And we have a Supreme Court case that says in 1803, Marbury versus Madison, anything that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. So why isn't that the precedent the federal government is using? Why are they using all of these other precedents?
Wow. You know what? Okay, so at this point, we can safely say that the United States has been co-opted. It's out of control. It's lawfare. It's being regulated to death. Uh, I'm in agreement, 100% of everything you've said, and I'm pretty dialed in. And I didn't know. I'm always searching for the root cause. So, what? How do we get out of this, Jim?
We get out of this by calling a convention of states. We are, I tell people all the time, okay, I ignore Washington at this point. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter who we send to the Senate. It doesn't matter who we elect to go to the House of Representatives. The system in Washington is broken, and they are never going to fix it. And the framers of the Constitution realized this day was coming. And that's why they left this second mode to the state legislatures. They wanted a source of power outside of the Beltway that could rein in a federal government that becomes a tyranny. So our effort must be spent in Harrisburg. We have got to demand our state legislators pass SR 77 and HR 106. Those are the concurrent resolutions circulating in Harrisburg calling to add Pennsylvania to the list of states calling for the convention. There are 19 states on board as we speak. We need 34. It's 2/3 of the several states. So we need 34 states to apply to Congress. Okay. On receipt of the 34th application, Congress must call the convention. Okay. And the call is simply the time, the place, and the topics to be discussed. The topics have to come from the 34 applications because those applications are what gives the convention the legal authority. And they say, well, we'll never know what's going to happen. We've never had a convention of states called under Article 5. That's true. Okay. But we've had 42 conventions of states in this country. 42. They've all run the same.
So
Parliamentary procedure has been around since the Magna Carta.
give us some examples or dates of the 42 that have occurred in the past. How can the average viewer relate?
The last one was literally in 2017. It was held out west, okay? I believe it was in Phoenix, and a bunch of states got out there because they were going to discuss the Article 5 convention because they were getting close to having the requisite number for the balanced budget amendment. They've had many conventions of states from 1677, and like I said, the last one was in 2017.
Okay.
And what is left out again, all 27 amendments of the Constitution have been proposed by Congress. And what's left out of that conversation is that many of those amendments started with a grassroots movement. Okay? The Bill of Rights. A grassroots movement started, and they wanted the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. And that came about. Congress acted before they could get to the requisite number of states. Presidential term limits started with a grassroots movement, and Congress acted before they could get to the requisite number of states.
And that was a different era because people were they were more freedom orientated. Their minds were numbed like they are today.
Yeah. And you know, the direct election of senators was also another one that started with a movement. And there's a Wikipedia page that lists all of the applications that have been sent to Congress to call an Article 5 convention. There's hundreds of them. They broach approximately 175 different topics. Why hasn't there ever been an Article 5 convention called? If there's been hundreds of applications, because no application had the similar enough wording to force Congress to call. And you go to Wikipedia and look Article 5 applications. There's a spreadsheet that you'll find, and you'll see many of the topics are similar. But because the wording in the application is different, they can't cobble together disparate ideas and try to force this through. And this is why what Convention of States Action is doing. We have a resolution that we are trying to get passed in 34 states so that the states send a similarly worded application to Congress. We want the topics of discussion to be term limits, fiscal restraint, and limiting the scope and jurisdiction of federal regulation.
All things we can agree with, but it's going to take some courage from the Pennsylvania state legislature. But I do see Matt has his hand up. Matt, do you have a question?
Not a question, but I just wanted to point out that in chat, I posted handouts that Jim O'Connor created and is referring to with the historical conventions, the explanation of an Article 5 and diagram, and also a glossary, because these are legal terms, and also his slide series. And Jim, from my count, I think we got about 17 minutes left.
Yep, we're there.
Okay.
I have the chat up, and if people wanted to take a look at that and click on those links, or go ahead and copy them down. But guys, thank you so much, Jim and Matt. I mean, this is eye-opening. So I've heard Mark Levin, who I'm a follower of the great one, Mark Levin. He advocates for the Convention of States. Is there any, and here's what I always hear about Convention of States: trapdoor, out of control, spinning in a direction that we don't want it to go into. So what are there safeguards? Are there Like, could we end up losing some of our rights after something like this? What dispel some of these myths?
Absolutely. Again, most of this comes from the opposition's uh, stating that an Article 5 Convention of States cannot be controlled. Okay? And they base it on the fact that the 1787 convention ran away. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Mm.
Okay? What the opposition leaves out of that argument is that they conflate the Articles of Confederation, which was the Constitution at the time, and the Constitution. In the Constitution, under Article 5, it says that the Congress must call. So they say, well, when the Continental Congress sent their call for the 1787 convention, it said all they could do was amend the Articles of Confederation. But that wasn't the call. The call for the 1787 convention came from the state of Virginia. And the Virginia call said they were going to meet the exigencies of the Union. They gave the commissioners the right to write a new document. And again, if we look at the history, it came from a convention of states held 8 months earlier in the fall of 1786 in Annapolis, Maryland. 5 states got together to discuss trade. And because the defects in the Articles of Confederation were so numerous, they didn't get anything accomplished. And they wrote a report. And if you can Google the 1786 Annapolis Convention report, okay? And what they said is we need to get together again, and we have got to work out a new government so that we can get rid of all of these defects. Virginia was one of the states involved in the 1786 Annapolis Convention. They went straight home and they wrote the original call for the 1787 convention, which wrote the Constitution. The opposition doesn't want you to know that. And they've come up with all kind of excuses and things that just aren't true. And the problem is they use fear and they use people's unfamiliarity with the law. Okay? Because let's face it, we're not constitutional scholars, right? Times have been good. We live a very fast place in life now. Who has got time to go down to the National Archives and search through thousands of documents to find the original answers to these problems?
And
well, Convention of States Action has. We have a list of all the case law that has set precedent about the functioning of an interstate convention. We have researched all of the calls. Okay, we have we have a litany of material at conventionofstates.com, written and video, that explains this process in the minutest detail. And what people have to do now is they have to educate themselves because they're not being told the truth. The mainstream media is the fifth branch of government. Okay? And people have to realize the federal government is so out of control right now that you tell the approved lie or they're going to destroy you.
The narrative.
Gee, Frank, you don't know anybody that would freaking have anything to do with that, do you?
Yeah. Oh, I know them personally. Yes. And
right?
They are quite crazy. Let me show you that, Jim.
I'll have to tell you offline. I got a theory about all of that. You're gonna love it.
Man. Yeah.
Okay.
Theory.
And so this is where it is. The framers left us the responsibility to remain engaged and informed. And because times move so fast nowadays, we have abdicated that responsibility.
Absolutely.
And Congress has just run roughshod.
Well,
There's an interview that Antonin Scalia made in
oh,
1979.
great jurist.
Okay, all right. He is probably the most originalist jurist this country has ever produced. And they say he was against using the Article 5 amending convention process.
Hmm.
Watch it, Google it. Antonin Scalia, 1979 interview. Um, it is fascinating. You hear all of the misconceptions on that from the other panelists. But Antonin Scalia diagnosed the problem then, told the answer, and said the reason for it. And the reason that he said was Congress could have fixed all of these questions years ago, but they won't because they want to keep the power.
And
It's an hour-long video. I recommend everybody watch that video.
yes,
It is amazing and eye-opening.
I'd say it's required. You have to. If you have to, and if it's only an hour, Antonin Scalia has a way of pointing things out relatively quickly. So an hour interview with Antonin Scalia is going to give you
Well, it wasn't it, he he's not the whole hour. There were three other panelists, okay, that were against. It's called a constitutional convention. What would come of it, or something like that? And it's by the It was done by the American Enterprise Institute.
yeah. Mhm.
And we listened to these three other panelists discuss why it can't be controlled and what's wrong with it. And Antonin Scalia took it all in, and then he came back and he said, this is the process the framers gave us to bypass Congress.
And you know
Right?
what? That's part of the problem. Congress.
That's it.
We know it because
Congress.
these guys go in there and they make 180,000 a year plus benefits, and all of a sudden they're millionaires. Like I know that they have side gigs and nefarious actions, even the best of them, because that's just human nature. That's the way it is. And this convention of states, okay, so it limits congressional power and restores some of that back to the people. Yeah.
And again, there have been a lot of grassroots movements that started that have died and haven't been able to call a convention. There are still applications on file for anti-polygamy that started in 1913. There are applications to put the schools back in charge, the states back in charge of education, because the federal government usurped state rights, and it all started with the segregation and the busing. That hasn't come to fruition. The anti-abortion. Everybody's heard for the March for Life. They march on Washington every year on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. There was a huge movement to call an Article 5 Convention of States to make life a constitutional amendment. And unfortunately, the elites started putting out all of this propaganda to scare people, and they were successful. They scared people from calling that convention to make life constitutional amendment. They March to Life got to 19 states.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And again, all of this is part of the historical record. And people have to go, it's all out there, but you've got to take the time and you've got to make the effort to go properly educate yourself. Because I can tell you for a fact, anything that you hear on the news is propaganda.
Yeah, it's
The news is crafted by experts to elicit a response. It has nothing to do with the
yeah.
truth.
Yep. Matt has another note for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scavo, and excuse me, Jim O'Connor. We got about 6 minutes left, and I hope that you will cover some of the most important misinformation we have, especially you mentioned the out of control in 1787. How about what could happen, like a Second Amendment, and how this it's so important, and how that cannot happen, and also about the commissioners. So we have a lot of misinformation out there. Could you address that, please, Mr. O'Connor?
Certainly. Again, what people don't realize is that a lot of this stuff has already been adjudicated. One of the main talking points of the opposition is because we've never had an Article 5 convention, and because the rules for an Article 5 convention aren't written in Article 5, nobody will know nobody can predict what could happen. Well, again, we've had 42 historical conventions of states in this country. They have all run by the same set of principles. The states call and they get together and they negotiate. They write a commission, all right, which is a written set of instructions to their agents. And basic agency law is going to govern their conduct. Anyone that oversteps their bounds of that written contract is violating the law. And based on the state law, they can be either recalled, they can be fined, they can be jailed.
Both.
Okay? So again, we can control the commissioners. The application that calls this convention is going to set the initial limit of what can be discussed. Again, the Article 5 Convention of States applications is going to be term limits, fiscal restraint, and limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Those are the only topics that can be debated. Now, let's say California comes and they're going to send nothing but socialists. We know that.
Yep.
And they're going to stand up and they're going to start screaming they want to abolish the Second Amendment. And what's going to happen is they're going to be gavelled out of order. Because for an order to debate a topic, it has to be in the application. And if it's not in the application, it can't be debated. So they will be gavelled out of order and they will be shut down. So we can control this convention. We can shut down the crazies. You know, there are so many different talking points about why they say it can't be can't be controlled. It can't be limited. Well, there's two Supreme Court cases that says exactly that. That an Article 5 Convention of States is an interstate convention, and it's endowed with the interstate convention's rules, and that an Article 5 convention can be specifically limited to one topic or a set of topics. You just can't come in and say anything that you want at this convention. You know, again, it all comes back down to educating yourself. We're talking about the law, and the law is very sophisticated, and you have to make the time to educate yourself because nobody else is going to tell you the truth. And the future of this country rests on the people of this country waking up and becoming self-governing again.
Well, you know what? Extremely interesting. And you have two big heavy hitters on your side. You have Mark Levin, who's calling for a convention of states, and then Antonin Scalia, who's when we review this Google video, that he states, okay, here's what it is. So in our remaining 2 minutes, I see Matt has another point of order here. Matt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scavo. And if I may, Jim, interrupt you, I just want to put an exclamation point on what you already said. I'm in firm agreement with. And some other misinformation is a crazy proposal could come out. Even though no one could come up with a crazy proposal that 34 states will agree to. So say something comes out of convention. It is a proposal. It is not the law. It needs to go through the ratification process, which may take years in deliberation and then approval of or rejection of. And the second thing is the Second Amendment. Right now, the state constitutions, about 12 of them have in allowance to carry a long rifle in the state capitol. 12. Okay, and about 22 have concealed carry allowed in the state capitol. So all it takes is 13 chambers in 13 different states to do nothing, and nothing happens to move forward with a convention of states proposal. The safeguard, the bar is very, very, very high, so that nothing crazy is going to come out of this. Back to you.
That's 13 out of the 34. So those 34 that meet, if 13 of them say, hey, this is not quite what we envisioned, then it's a dead issue, even though the convention of states had met. So that's a good point. Yeah, very.
And again, there's 99 state legislatures, bodies in this country. One state has a unified legislature. Okay, everybody else has the bi-chamber. 13 of those chambers doing nothing.
We got 30 seconds.
Okay, 13 of those chambers doing nothing will stop any bad amendment. The framers wanted overwhelming public support for any proposed amendment, and they have it. 67% of this country agrees that Article 5 is the solution. Check it out.
Those framers were brilliant. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining us today on the King's Report. This was action-packed, a lot of facts, a lot of things for us to research, but at a 10,000-foot overview, which we just did, it sounds like a pretty good idea. So let's all investigate. So, gentlemen, Jim, Matt, thank you for a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure we'll meet with you guys again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Okay, good. That's the end of the show. So,
Frank, real quickly,
sure.
Okay, I want you to go to the FBI vault.
FBI vault. I'll write this down.
The FBI vault, and it is their archives, and it's online, and you can search Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. He was the mayor of Baltimore. He was a congressman from Maryland's 3rd Congressional District.
Okay.
And you know who else he is?
Who?
It's Nancy Pelosi's father.
That's right. That's right. Nancy, yes. Nancy D'Alessandro, yes.
Okay. People don't realize that's who she is. Okay.
Yep.
Now, when you search that, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find a 286-page dossier on the big Tommy D'Alessandro and his mob connections.
Yes.
Okay. I'll bet you can't tell me the day that report was made public.
What's the tie into Nancy? The day she was elected? 6 months before?
It became public from a FOIA request on January the 6th, 2021. Does that date ring a bell?
Yeah, it rings a bell, sure.
And all of the fingers are pointing at her that she coordinated all this nonsense. Do you think maybe she was trying to cover up the fact that her daddy's dossier just became public?
Man. Yeah. That whole day went sideways from the beginning.
Yep.
Wow. So I didn't know, at least. I knew some of the background that, you know, this was mob related, and that's how she got to where she got to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, crazy.
Well, and again, people don't know her history. Okay, I'll tell you this. My theory is quite simple. Um, you look at the major cities in this country that have absolute Democrat control for the past 60, 70, 80 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Los Angeles, San Francisco,
Chicago.
Seattle, New Orleans, Chicago, right? Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. What do all of those cities have in common?
Big population centers, commerce,
Yeah.
lawyers.
They're ports.
Oh. Hmm.
Now, I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. Okay. I'm very familiar with Baltimore, Maryland. And I can tell you one of the most corrupt places in that city is the port. And it has been reputed that it has been mob controlled